Hey guys, welcome to this React tutorial on learning the basics of React in under 30 minutes. So in this video, we're going to cover a lot of the basic concepts that you need to create a React application. In this video, we will be showing you how to create a basic counter, and then we'll also be showing you how to create a to-do application. So let me go ahead and show you an example of what we will be creating. So this here in front of us is the basic to-do application. It doesn't look too pretty because we didn't want to spend much time making it look really nice. What we wanted to focus on was the functionality. So pretty basic, you can check off some of your to-do items. You can add a new to-do item. So we could say do dishes, and that will show up in there. Go to the gym, and that will show up on there. So you can check off items. And then you can also click to clear the completed items, and those will go away. You can also persist state. So if we refresh this page or we open this in a new tab, you can see that we still have the items there. Even if we were to check two of them off and open this in a new tab, you can see that those are currently checked off. So this tutorial is going to go by really quick, and I hope that you will stick around till the end, and we'll teach you very basics of how to build a React application starting from ground zero. We'll be using Vite for the installation, but we're not going to use any of their default templates. We're going to just start off with a blank index.html file and then add components from there. So even if you have no knowledge of React, this would be the video for you. I would hope that you have some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript knowledge, because you probably need that in order to understand some of the concepts of React. But without further ado, let's dive into it and learn React. Okay, let's start off by installing React on your local machine. So to install React, we are going to use a build tool called Vite. You can visit it at vite.dev and install it with npm. So after we have that installed, we can run npm create vite at latest. And it's going to ask us for a project name, and I'm just going to call this React. And it's going to ask us what framework that we want to use. And because we are learning React, we will use the React framework. And there's a few variants here. I wouldn't worry too much about all these. I would just select the JavaScript. Now we can cd into that folder, and we can run npm install to install our dependencies. Then we can run npm run dev, and you can see that we have a local URL at localhost 5173, and if we go to that application, we have a simple page here that has a counter component, and this is the React application that Vite just created. So let's go ahead and open this up in our code editor, and since I stopped the npm there, I'm going to open up my terminal here and run it right there. Okay, so the index.html is what gets loaded from our application. You can see here's the title and the div ID of root. We're actually going to clear all of this out, and then we're going to just start from scratch. And the same thing with the source folder. We're going to remove all of this just so you can see how everything comes together, and you don't have to worry about the boilerplate that comes with Vite, which is just a landing page with a counter component. So how about we create a simple HTML page? And we'll just call this React app. And let's create an H1 and just say, hello, React. And if we save that, we have hot module reloading. So whenever we save our code, we will see it live in our browser. Okay, next, let's learn how we can render our React application and create our first index.jsx file. So first thing first, we are going to add what you just seen before is a div with an ID of root. And sometimes people will also refer to this as div ID of app. And then we also need to include our main, or in our case, we're going to create a index.jsx. So how about we create that inside of our source folder? We'll call that index.jsx. And JSX is a syntax that tells JavaScript, hey, we are also going to include HTML inside of our JavaScript. This is very common. You'll be seeing JSX files quite a bit if you are using React. So first things first, we want to import the create root from React DOM. And this is very common for every single React application that you're going to be creating. Then we need to create a constant root element, and we are going to call the create root method, and we are going to pass it the ID of the element that we want to render our React application. So then we'll say root.render, and how about we just add an h1 here? Hello from JSX. Okay, and if we save that, we still get this h1 here because we have not updated this inside of our HTML. So we need to add the index.jsx to this script file. So we'll say script, and this needs to be a type module. And this is because we are using JavaScript and JSX. You need to include this attribute for a JSX file. So then we'll say source is going to be at source/index.jsx. And if we save that, sure enough, we get hello from JSX. So that was how to render your React application. Next, let's get into components. So how about we create a simple counter component? Simple enough. Let's go into our source folder and create a new folder that we will call components. And this is very common that React applications will have a components folder where all the components will live. And we will call this counter.jsx. Now, components are essentially just functions. So we could just create a function and call this counter, and then we could return some HTML. Then we are going to import this component, so we need to export it. So we'll say export default counter. But if we wanted to make it read a little bit better, we could just take this export defaults and move it right up here at the top. Okay, then jumping back over to our index.jsx, we need to import counter from components/counter. Instead of our h1, you guessed it, we are going to call counter. And this is good to know that every React application has a capital letter at the beginning. If you were to say lowercase counter, you're going to get an error and it's not going to display on the screen because that is what renders an HTML element. But if you have a capital letter at the beginning of an element, you know that that is a React component. Okay, now let's add the functionality for our counter. So we are going to use our first React hook. So we're going to import a useState hook. And React has plenty of hooks that you can use that help you with additional functionality in your React application. There are 3 hooks that we'll be covering in this video, and useState is one of the most popular ones. It allows us to manage state, meaning the value of, say, like a count variable or someone's name. So then we can use the useState method, and we will pass in the initial value. So in this case, we want count to be set as 0. And this is going to return 2 variables. It is going to return the count and set count. These are also referred to as setters and getters. So to get the value of count, we will use count. Anytime we want to update that value, we are going to use this set count method. We'll be using this a lot throughout this tutorial, so you'll learn more about this as we go. Now let's change this to a button here. And then we're going to add an onClick event here. So we'll say onClick equals, and it looks like that the autocomplete already knows what we want to do. So we are going to call this function set count, and we're going to set count plus 1. Pretty simple stuff. Let's go ahead and save that. Go back to our index and save that. And here we have the counter. So we need to print out the current value of count. So we'll say count is, and to print out a variable, we'll just use the curly braces and the name of the variable, and that will print out the value of count. So now you can see we can use our counter. Now, one more thing that I want to mention is that we have this return HTML here, but if we wanted to break this up into multiple lines, we would actually need to add parentheses. Otherwise, it will not render correctly. So sure enough, if we save that, the counter works as usual. Next, we're going to jump over to our to-do application. So let's head back into our index.jsx, and I'm going to add a little bit of UI for our to-do application. So I'm going to have a parent div, and inside of this div, how about we have an h1 that we just call to-do app. And after this h1, then we probably want an input, and this is going to be where we add our to-do. So it's going to be an input type of text. Let's give it a placeholder, add your to-do. Then we want a submit button, and we also want an additional button, and this button is going to be to clear the completed to-dos. Okay, and if we save that, now we get our to-do UI. Nothing too fancy, but this is going to show you kind of how React works and how we can add to-dos to our to-do list. Now, before we move on to adding our to-dos to the actual list, I want to separate this into its own component. So this is very common inside of your index.jsx where you want run the root.render. You typically render a base component. In this case, we are going to call it app. So then we'll need to import that. And of course, we get an error because we have not created that component yet. So let's create a new app.jsx. And we'll return the original HTML that we had in there. And if we save this, go back into our index, we now have the same UI. Okay, so now that we have the UI, how about we start adding some actual to-dos? So we are going to do that inside of our app component. So we want to use that useState hook again because we want a way to be able to track all of our to-dos. We want to be able to store the to-dos and set the to-dos. So at the top here, I'm just going to say import useState from React. And then we are going to create a new const, and we are going to have the to-dos, the set to-dos, and in the useState, we're just going to set this to an empty array. So remember again, this is our getter and this is our setter. Now, when the user clicks on the submit button, we want to run a method that will add a new to-do. So we'll say onClick equals, and we're going to create a new method called handleAddTodo. And we can add that function right up here. We'll say function handleAddTodo. And for most React components, you have the HTML, and then you usually have a lot of the logic that pertains specifically to this component, which is great because you have all of your logic and then all of your display or your view in the same file. But you do want to break them up into subcomponents, whatever makes more sense for your application. So now that we have the handleAddTodo, we want to make use of our setter. So let's say set to-dos, and inside of here, this is going to return a callback, and inside of it, it's going to have our current to-dos. And what we want to do is we want to add a new item to this array. So I'm just going to return the current to-dos, and I'm going to give it an ID. You can see that autocomplete kind of finished it for us. The ID should be unique, and you may want to use an auto-incrementing ID. In this case, we're just going to use date.now. And then instead of text, I think we'll have something like name. This will be the name of the to-do. And how about we just add something in here? We'll say buy groceries. And then we'll also have a key and value for whether or not this task has been completed. Okay, so now we should be able to add something like walk dog, click on submit, and that is just going to add multiple of these to-dos to our list. So we want a way to be able to see what is inside of our to-dos array. So how about we create a new component and call this to-do list.jsx. Okay, and you'll see that the autocomplete actually added in this to-dos right here. And this is what is referred to as props. So we are able to take the value, we have to-dos right here in our app.jsx, and we're able to pass it to any other components. So in this case, when we list out our to-do list, we are going to pass the to-dos. So since we've added this component here, remember we also need to import it up here at the top. And now you can see that we have that h2. I think that this is kind of redundant. We don't need an additional title up here. But what we do need to do is we need to loop through our to-dos. So to do that, we can use the map method. So we'll say todos.map, and then we can just pass the to-do and wrap that inside of a div here. So let's save this, and you can see that I spelled groceries incorrectly, but it's displaying all our to-dos. If I were to say walk dog, you're going to see that we get that incorrect by groceries again. And that's because we just hard-coded the value right here inside of name. So what we need to do is we need to capture the value inside of this text input and store that as the name. And to do that, we are going to use another hook, which is called useRef. And this allows us to reference any elements inside of our HTML and get the value from it. So to do that, after useState, we'll add a comma and we'll say useRef. And then we'll create a new variable. We'll call this input reference and just set the default to null. And then down here, we are going to add this reference to our input. And we will do that with ref equals input ref. So now if we want to be able to get the name that we've added inside of the input, we can just reference that by saying input ref dot current dot value. And the current is because if we were to have multiple of these components on the page, it needs to know which of the inputs that we are looking for, and the current, React is smart enough to know that this is the current input value that we want to get. Now we can add name right down here, and then we probably also need to clear that input. So we'll say input ref dot current dot value is an empty string. Let's go ahead and save our files and come back here and let's say walk dog and click on submit. And sure enough, that gets added to our to-do list. And how about we add the buy groceries and maybe we spell it correctly this time. And there we go. Now we have our 2 of our tasks that we've just added. Now, one quality of life improvement, it would be nice if we could press the enter key and automatically have the to-do added to our list. Let's go ahead and add an onKeyDown event. And the onKeyDown is going to be just an anonymous function here. Looks like autocomplete knows what we want. If event key equals enter, then we want to handle add_todo. So we need to pass event right up here. Let's test this out. Let's come back here and say that we need to do laundry and press enter. Sure enough, that gets added to our list. Now we need to add a checkbox next to each of our items so we can check this as completed or check it as done. So let's go ahead and go into our to-do list. And in here, instead of listing this out, and actually one thing that I should point out is we need to also specify a key. So if we were to say reorder this, React doesn't know which one goes in which order. So for every time you loop through an array or any piece of data, you need to have a unique key. And this is key equals todo.id. So as long as that string is unique, then you should have no problem looping through your data. So we have our to-do list here. It would probably make sense to have a to-do item, so a to-do component. So how about, we don't have this yet, but how about we say import, and we want to have a to-do item, or maybe we'll just call it to-do, from, we'll say /to-do, and right here we'll say to-do, kind of building what we want to create. If we say this, we're going to get an error. So we want this to actually be self-closing to-do. And let's create that new component. So we'll say todo.jsx, export default function to-do. And again, we need to pass in that specific prop. And in this case, it is going to be that to-do item. And let's print out again the to-do.name. Let's go ahead and save that and go back to our to-do list. Now we need to pass the to-do as a prop. So to-do equals and pass the to-do. Now let's test this out again. We'll say buy groceries. And sure enough, that gets added to the list, walk dog, and added to the list. Cool, so we have our separate to-do component. We need to add the checkbox, and then we need to have that function. When the user clicks on the checkbox, it is going to mark completed as true. So up here, let's make this a label. And then we'll have an input type of checkbox. And we need to say when to-do.completed is true, then this is going to be checked. So autocomplete is really helping us out here. So next, we want to add an onChange event. So here, whenever we toggle this on or off, that is going to trigger a change event, and we need to send that up the chain. So we need to probably call a method. So from here, let's say that we have a method called toggleTodo, and we want to pass the todo.id. So we know that the toggleTodo is going to be passed down, so we need to add it up here at the top in the argument. Since we've added that here, we also need to add that to our to-do list. And again, we need to pass that down to our to-do. Now let's create that toggleTodo inside of our app.jsx. We'll say function toggleTodo, and we are going to use our set to-dos. So inside here, we want to loop through the current to-dos, And we want to say if the todo.id is equal to the ID that we have passed in, then we want to set that completed to the inverse. So if it was false, it will now be true. If it's true, it will now be false. Otherwise, we are going to return the original to-do. Okay, let's save that. And as we scroll down here, we also need to pass that as the prop. So we'll save that, come back here, and now we can check items on and off. Now, before moving on, we could probably clean up this code a little bit. So you can see we can use an arrow function right here, and this could be quite a bit cleaner. So we could remove that return. And we could do the same right down here. So if we return this, and you know what, we could clean this up a little bit and say we want this to be an arrow function. And then we want to use a ternary here. So we'll say if todo.id equals ID, then we want to return that to-do with the completed toggled. Otherwise, we want to just return the original to-do. Okay, looks like we're getting an error here. Let's fix this. All right, we have to-do. Yes, I think we have an extra curly brace right here. Let's save that. Yeah, sure enough, come back here, do laundry, and we check that on and off, and that looks good. I think we're also getting some additional helper from my IDE here saying that we could clean this up even more. Let's go here with an arrow function, remove this, move this back here. This is going to look a lot cleaner. Okay. Okay, we add that, and now we can check on and off. And you can see now this looks quite a bit cleaner than it was before. Okay, next we want to clear the completed. So when we click on this button, we want to remove the items that have been checked. So let's go down here to this button, and we'll add an onClick. And then we'll call this method handleClearCompleted. Well, let's create that up here. And we're going to set our to-dos. And check this out, autocomplete just helped us out there. So what we are doing here is we're setting to-dos, and we are using the arrow operator. So we're saying we're going to filter through all of the to-dos. And if this to-do, if it is completed, this will invert it to be false. So it will say, do not include this one in that list. So essentially, we are removing any specific item that has been checked. Let's go ahead and test this out. Say buy groceries, walk dog, and go to gym. Okay, so we just got done walking the dog, clear completed, and that gets taken off the list. Okay, now the last thing that we want to talk about is one more hook, which is called useEffect. And we are going to use this to persist data whenever we refresh the page. So the useEffect gets called whenever any value gets changed. So say that our to-do item gets changed, we want to have some functionality that kind of tracks that. It's kind of like watching the to-do. So like if we add something or remove something, it is going to be notified. Let's go ahead and use that useEffect right here. This is going to take in a function. And after the function, we include an array of dependencies. And this is what we want to watch. So we want to watch for the to-dos. So anytime something changes, we want to run some code. Okay, so to store this in local storage, it should be very simple. So we can say localStorage.setItem to-dos, and there we have it. It already did that for us. So we want to stringify the results. So we want to say JSON.stringify. So the to-dos object will be converted into a string. Let's go ahead and test this out. So if I say buy groceries and walk dog, and now we open up our DevTools, and if we go into our application and we check out local storage, you can see here we have these to-dos. So right now it is just stored as a string. So which means when we refresh the page, we need to be able to convert that string back into a JSON object. Right now, if we refresh, it's just going to give us an empty list because we haven't said when this component is booted, we want you to take what's inside of local storage and put that inside of to-dos. Let's go ahead and do that. So we can use the useEffect again And this time we want to use it for when this component is booted. And look at there, the AI already knows what we want to do. So we want to store the saved to-dos from local storage. And then if there is some values in there, we want to set the to-dos. And we also want to do JSON.parse on all of those. So let's give this a try. Let's say walk dog, go to gym, and buy groceries. And if we check this off, let's go ahead and reload the page, and you can see that our items are still on this list. We can clear completed, refreshed, and now our items are persisting. So that is it. That's React in 30 minutes. I would encourage you to check out the documentation. Basically, we learned how to install React. We learned how to render React and a little bit about JSX and what JSX is. We learned about components, then taught you about the hook. So there was the useState, useRef, and useEffect hook. And then we learned how you can pass props and how you can do loops, and then just kind of the structure of a basic React application. So I hope you learned some things, and I hope to see you in a future video.